Welcome to everyone to our meeting this afternoon. Joining us via Starleaf is Alex Easton, Pat Sheehan, Diane Dodds and Emma Sheeran. I'm on my lonesome here in the in the room here. This meeting has been recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online. Members, you're welcome to use mobile devices as long as they're in airplane mode. If members are content, can we proceed through the agenda? Okay. First off, apologies. I have apologies. So, I have apologies from John Stewart, and Trevor Lunn has been delayed, so he will be joining the meeting later on when he gets free. Chairperson's business, item number 2. Members, the committee agreed to seek an informal meeting with the TEO Permanent Secretary on the subject of the arrangements for the apology for victims and survivors of the Historical Institute of Abuse. This meeting could not take place, but a letter asking for details of arrangements has been sent to the Permanent Secretary. Members will be aware that there have been media reports and they may have heard speculation from a range of sources as to the exact arrangements for the apology. Discussions are still at a very delicate stage, and officials, ministers and political parties are working towards a solution for an apology on the 11th of March that is acceptable to the victims and survivors. And I think that's probably a good outcome at this stage. You know that the apology is going to proceed, whatever the format, on the 11th of March. So we'll keep members updated as soon as we know the exact details in and around that. Second item of Chair's business, just to let you know that I have been invited to attend the rescheduled meeting of the Interparliamentary Forum, which is taking place on the 25th of February in the House of Lords. This will again be the initial meeting of the reconstituted forum for the UK legislators, and it is anticipated that the first meeting will be introductory and will look at how the forum will operate going forward. So that's next Friday. Yeah. Item number 3 under Chair's business, just making a passing observation on a story that was in the Irish News this week in relation to the UK Community Renewal Fund. Money from which for Northern Ireland is reportedly going to a GB company. I think it would be useful if the Executive Office could provide this committee with a short briefing on this as it relates to post-Brexit funding relationships, and it would be good to understand the background. And if anybody had read it, it was in the business section of the Irish News. There was a significant funding that went to an Oxfordshire-based company, £1.8 million. From the Northern Ireland allocation, and we just want to have an understanding of why such a large amount of money went to that company, and maybe who their partners are here in Northern Ireland, because they're not based here at all. And there were quite a few organisations that bid for applications and money, and they didn't get it. So if we could get an understanding of that, would be good. So also just to let you know, we're trying to organise a group photograph of the committee in order to help prepare our legacy report. So we're trying to schedule it perhaps for a Monday and a suitable date. So we're looking at possibly the 28th of February, and we'll get more details to you as soon as we know. Okay. Item number 3, draft minutes. Members, the draft minutes of the meeting held on the 9th of February 2022 are at pages 6 to 11 of the meeting pack. If members are content that they're a true reflection of the proceedings, I'm happy to sign. Okay. Item number 4, matters arising. Members, I would refer to correspondence from the department on pages 3 to 6 of your table pack. This letter states that while officials will not be available to engage with the committee, as they do so on behalf of the ministers, but the department will answer factual queries This letter relates to the letters that we wrote last week to the department asking just for the current status now that the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister are not in position. So if members would agree, I think that we should proceed. And if we wish to make engagement with the department on a case-by-case basis, requesting information as normal and responding to the departmental responses in line with the roles and the powers of this committee, I think that's the only way forward. We'll have to just do it on an issue-by-issue basis and wait on the response from the department, and then we can make a response back if we feel that they are not giving us or not furnishing us with the information that we require or the actions. But there's no other way around this. We have to just take it as it is. We're in new territory here. Are members happy with that action? Okay. Matters arising also. The clerk, as you can see, has prepared a summary paper for submission to the Finance Committee for a consolidated response to the consultation of the draft budget. You'll see that on pages 13 to 14 of the meeting pack for the relevant papers. With your agreement, members, can I forward this summary paper to the Finance Committee? And can I also suggest that the committee writes to the department on certain matters raised in the paper, and the first one being if they could give us an update on the Main and Square development, because again that money has not moved forward for spend. Also, can they give us they have indicated the financial requirements consequent to the language and culture commitments in the New Decade New Approach Agreement, where if there's no commitment there in the financial spend, where will that money come from? And also the same in relation to the implementation of the report on the Flags, Identity, Culture and Tradition Commission. You know, if there's no allocated spend against that, well, we need to know where that money will come from. And a future date. Are you happy enough for us to write and seek clarification? Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, Chair, sorry, can I come in?
Okay, yes, of course you can, Diane.
Yeah, thank you. Could we also seek clarification as to why the Minister says that Casement can go ahead, but the regional stadia cannot go ahead? And how this is allocated, and why he's able to allocate money to Casement without a business case, without everything being signed off, etc., but is so adamant that the money for the regional stadia cannot go ahead.
And again,
I think that would be a useful clarification to get from the Finance Minister.
Okay. Well, this is going back to the department, our own department, Diane. To ask.
Well, still, I know it goes back to TEO, but that still would be a very useful clarification for us to get and to understand from the finance departments, that we have that input and we know with some clarity what's going on. Okay. It seems to me that we're treating one in a particular way and another in a totally separate way. And I would hate to think that politics is being played with the future of football in Northern Ireland.
Well, we'll write to the department and to the Minister and seek clarification in and around the reasons around that. Okay.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, item number 5, Equality Commission Fair Employment School Teachers Bill oral briefing. Can I refer members to pages 15 to 53 of the meeting pack for the relevant papers? And can I welcome Geraldine McGahey, Commissioner of the Equality Commission for Northern Ireland, and Mr Darren McKinstry, Director Policy and Research for the Equality Commission for Northern Ireland. Can I advise you that the session is being recorded by Hansard, and the transcript and video of the meeting will be available on the committee webpage. You're both very, very welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We're delighted to be here, and thank you very much for the invitation to come and speak with you today in relation to the Fair Employment School Teachers Bill. And as you've said, I'm joined by Darren, who is the Commission's Director of Public Policy and Strategic Engagement. So with your permission, I intend to say just a few words in terms of the Commission's position, and then Darren and I will endeavour to answer your questions or address any concerns that you might have. So really at the outset, what I want to say is that the Commission's long-standing view is that the exception in the employment provisions of the Fair Employment and Treatment Order 1998 should be removed. We firmly believe that all teachers should be able to enjoy the same legislative protection as other workers and should also be included in the monitoring and review requirements, as indeed are other occupations. By way of some background to this, you will be aware of the Commission's statutory remit to keep the Fair Employment and Treatment Order under review. And in this context, the Commission undertook a substantial review way back in 2004, the outcome of which was the Commission's recommendation that the teachers' exception should be narrowed to restrict the exception to teachers in mainstream primary schools. And at that time, the Commission also set out its view that the long-term objective should be to include teachers in the religious discrimination provisions. The Commission noted that if the exception was to be retained in relation to recruitment of teachers in primary schools, this should merely be a staging post towards its eventual removal. This recommendation was further developed way back in 2009 when the Commission further recommended that early consideration be given to removing the exception at primary school level also. But given the passage of time since the Commission's original recommendations, we believe it's important that current consideration should take account of developments and research since then. An example of such change is that access to obtaining the certificate in religious education has widened substantially. It can be undertaken alongside initial teacher training education at the University of Ulster and Stranmillis University College, in addition to the more long-standing provision available at St Mary's University College. I think it's fair to say that if the exception was removed, like other employers, schools would no longer be able to lawfully discriminate on the grounds of religious belief or political opinion in the appointment of teachers in schools, either in the initial recruitment or indeed in their promotion. Like other employers with more than 10 employees, schools would indeed be required, amongst other things, to monitor the community background of their teaching staff, to carry out Article 55 reviews of their teaching workforces and of the employment policies and practices affecting that teaching staff, and consider whether they are providing fair participation to members of the Protestant and Roman Catholic communities in relation to the employment of teachers. Existing provisions providing genuine occupational requirements would also apply to the employment of teachers. We very much welcome the suggested inclusion of an implementation date and the potential to allow for a staged approach. Such a staged approach would potentially allow for anti-discrimination provisions to come into force while the mechanisms for monitoring are put in place. And as with commencement, there may be merit in setting timelines for each stage of the staged implementation so as to ensure that it's fully implemented. It's important that equality impacts of the bill should be considered at the outset and monitored over time and appropriate mitigations implemented. And indeed, the explanatory and financial memorandum of the bill states that it's not anticipated that the bill will give rise to significant additional expenditure. However, there may be costs for establishment and maintenance of employment monitoring procedures. It's the Commission's view that these costs of implementation should be considered and provided for at the outset. We anticipate that there is likely to be administrative costs associated with the introduction of employment monitoring, the compilation and completion of annual reporting forms, and undertaking triennial reviews and taking any appropriate affirmative actions. Although I should say that many schools with more than 10 non-teaching staff members will already have such systems in place, so it is a process of having to enlarge those and extend them to cover all of the issues. There would also be an additional resource implication for the Commission itself in terms of its advice and compliance function, including the monitoring, the Article 55 reviews, recruitment practices, and any advice on the use of the genuine occupational requirements provision. And similarly, there is the potential for tribunal and conciliation costs associated with the introduction of a new right of action. So in conclusion, all I want to say is that the Commission is strongly of the view that teachers should be able to enjoy the same legislative protection as other workers. Teachers should also be included in monitoring and review arrangements, as are all other occupations. Our long-standing recommendation is that this exception should be abolished. So I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to share the Commission's position with you. And now Darren and I are more than happy to try to address any questions that you have or issues that you want to discuss. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Geraldine, for that, and that's a strong endorsement for the removal. Can you maybe outline, is there any similar exemptions in other jurisdictions?
I think Darren might be best placed to address that issue as he's the director with responsibility.
Thanks, Chair. Welcome. Hello, members as well. I'm not specifically aware of such an exemption. Certainly an exemption was written into EU law many years ago, but it was specifically written into EU law because of the exemption that was in place in Northern Ireland. So given that it may be limited to Northern Ireland.
Okay, and you mentioned, Geraldine, in your presentation about a staged approach. And that consideration is, is definitely in the mix. Can you maybe elaborate a wee bit on how you would see that staged approach would take place?
I think there are a lot of issues that are being debated publicly at the moment. And I think by having a staged approach, provided that a start, middle and end point is actually defined in legislation, it will take us along the road of removing this exception. Presently, with there being no right of challenge to any decisions that are made in terms of recruitment or promotion, this provides people with the opportunity to have the same protections as others. If it is staged, it could be staged on the basis of post-primary schools initially before it's expanded out to other schools. It allows for the whole sector to move in a gradual basis. It allows for protections to be introduced while at the same time developing the monitoring process. So it's not so much a big bang, but allows for the outworkings of such approach to be fully implemented and mitigated for. I believe that there could potentially be an issue in relation to primary schools and the development of religious education, etc. And I think having a staged approach would help address some of those concerns. Primary school is where most, I would say, development in education in terms of religious sacraments takes place, although that would really be for CCMS to address. There are movements in other jurisdictions, in Dublin, for example, where the Catholic Church, the bishops have decided that education and preparation for sacraments take place between the parish and the family outside of the school. That would appear to be different from what's taken place here in Northern Ireland. But by having a staged approach, perhaps some of those issues could be addressed. But I think Darren wants to address this issue as well. Darren, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. I think there's one key area as well where a staged approach would help, and it relates to the preparation for sort of monitoring and review. You could choose to adopt an approach where the protections for individuals came in immediately, but actually that there was a bit of lead time to allow for where systems needed to be set up if that was the case, or certainly monitoring to get up and running. There's a process of registration for employers, there's a process of actual monitoring of the workforce, and then ultimately every 3 years there would be a process to sort of review that information. So a short phased approach might allow for first the protections and then the monitoring to follow.
Okay, and just in relation to an impact assessment and how if you were doing an impact assessment by removing that exemptions, would it not affect Catholics more than it would Protestants, and you know, being the Equality Commission, is that not something that you would be concerned about from a policy or legislative issue?
I think it is fair to say that yes, we would be concerned, and mitigating factors need to be considered as part of that equality impact assessment. The requirements for a certificate in religious education, Catholic ethos, etc. within schools, they all currently exist. And I think that the fact that this for the first time would be providing protection for all teachers, I think we need to monitor how that would roll out. There's also the issue of the general occupational requirement. At this moment in time, it's hard to see how that would be considered and how it would be developed. It must be a legitimate reason, it must be proportionate to the need. So all of those factors do need to be considered, and mitigations potentially introduced depending on how the monitoring pans out, see how things would develop. Darren, have you anything that you want to add to that? I've just given a very brief overview.
Yeah, obviously, when the legislation would pass to the department for implementation, it would be important that they undertake, under their duties, a full equality impact assessment. I'm not particularly aware of what the argument would be in terms of it disadvantaging those from a Catholic background. I don't particularly have any evidence that the exemption is currently being used on a routine basis, but certainly, as Geraldine touched on there are specific criteria in place for teaching jobs across all the sectors. Some of those relate to the religious education certificate, which is now more accessible than it was in the past, and some of those relate to ethos. So, it's worthwhile considering what the outworkings of those requirements are, but that's not different to what's in place at the minute. So, yeah, not particularly aware of what the argument would be, the disadvantage for Catholics.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Can I bring Emma Sheeran into the spotlight, please?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to you both for the presentation. I suppose one of the questions that I wanted to ask, obviously this piece of legislation sort of focuses on the reconciliation between what we would call the two main communities. And I wanted to get your view on how important it is in the context of a more multicultural society with more people in our education now than just those who identify as Catholic or Protestant.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that our society is becoming more and more diverse as ethnic minority population increases, and we get a more diverse culture in its entirety. I think it's really important. The Commission's view is that education should be shared. It should be the same for everyone. It's an opportunity for our communities to mix together. I think this particular piece of legislation has the potential to put all teachers on an even footing. Whether or not it will deliver a more diverse education system within the schools, that will be for the schools to determine. This is purely about the recruitment of teachers, but the more diverse a teaching staff can be, the more diverse the education experience of children will be. And I don't want to stray into the integration bill that's currently being discussed as well, because that's a separate issue. Our focus on this particular piece of legislation is about ensuring that all teachers have the same opportunities, the same equality of opportunity as any other occupation in Northern Ireland. So I think I'd be straying into another piece of potential legislation if I was to go further than that. But Darren, I think, wants to come in on it as well.
Yes, thank you. Just a point to add. I mean, obviously, although the fair employment legislation is sort of very generically titled in that way, it is specifically about community background, and the teacher's exception exists only within that legislation. It doesn't exist within the legislation on the other grounds. So there is protection for teachers, on race, on gender, etc. So that's there. So that the specific issue here is on the grounds of religion and political opinion to make the protection the same. So the protections are there on the other grounds already.
Thanks, Geraldine and Darren, I suppose this bill is fairly straightforward. It just removes the exemption. Do you think that the legislation that's there in terms of the fair treatment legislation from 98 and 2003 is going to be enough to allow schools to be able to do this equality monitoring? Is that enough training for them?
Yeah, Darren, do you want to come in on the practicalities of that?
Yes, certainly. Obviously, with any amendment to legislation, you know, there are overheads. As Geraldine touched on earlier, actually, teachers are typically appointed not through the schools themselves, but through bodies such as the Education Authority. Those bodies are already registered and specified under the fair employment legislation, so they already have the training, are delivering it, have the systems. It's an issue of potentially upscaling those systems, maybe a capacity thing within them, and maybe some training sort of on the coal face in terms of for teachers and those within schools who are either filling in monitoring forms or compiling them. So we absolutely see that there's some overhead involved and some training required, but it's not potentially on the scale of assuming that sort of it's on the scale of 11,000 individual schools, for example.
Thank you.
I have just a final question here. Geraldine, you refer to mitigations and mitigation processes, procedures, and you know, particularly if you were phasing it in the nature that you spoke about. What specifically type of mitigations are you thinking around?
I think that falls out of the quality impact assessment and how the new requirement and the new challenges might actually place one section of the community more than another. At this moment in time, it would be hard to put any substance to that because we don't have any information in relation to the recruitment and the promotion of teachers in schools. However, issues such as pastoral care, ethos, certificate of religious education, it's hard to see how that might pan out, but they need to be monitored. And then, depending on the information that's coming to light, then mitigating factors should be introduced to address those, whether that's in terms of a more specific, a more detailed analysis of what school ethos might be and how that might be addressed in relation to perhaps even the certificate in religious education, and assisting schools and boards of governors in the appointment process. Does that help address your issue?
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard to be clear about it at this particular juncture, but yeah, you can foresee what kind of processes would need to be looked at. Okay, I have no other indications from members to ask questions, which is probably a good point, so that you've explained yourself very well. So thank you, Geraldine and Darren, for your contribution this afternoon and your briefing to the committee.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Members, I think that we'll move on to our next briefing and then we can discuss maybe afterwards if we have any actions. But the next briefing is from the Transferor Representatives Council, and it's the Fair Employment School Teachers Bill again, and can I refer to members to the meeting pack for the relevant papers, and can I welcome are they there? Yeah. Can I welcome Ms. Karen Jardine, member of the Transferor Representatives Council, and Dr. Peter Hamill, Transferor Representatives Council. Can I advise you both that this session has been recorded by Hansard, and the transcript and video of the meeting will be available on the committee webpage. And can I invite you both to address the committee?
Chair, I think I'll start if that's okay. So just to say thank you for the opportunity to speak to the committee this morning. Myself and Peter are here on behalf of the Transferor Representatives Council. Peter's a last minute stand-in, so I'm going to take the lead in this bit, and then both of us will engage with your questions. Just a little bit of background on the TRC. Involves the Methodist Church, the Church of Ireland, the Presbyterian Church. In Ireland, involved primarily with the controlled skills sector, seeks to uphold the interests of those churches in that sector, and to promote and maintain the non-denominational Christian ethos in those schools. I just want to put on record our thanks to the bill sponsor for his engagement with us as the TRC during the policy development stage of the legislation, and subsequent offers to meet with him as well. And I suppose TRC has been following the development of this legislation and different debates in the Assembly, and we note the private members' motion that took place back in May last year, and where all the main political parties expressed their support for the removal of FEDO or the FEDO exemption. And the committee has just a very short briefing note from the TRC regarding its position on this. And so I suppose words like equality and discrimination, they're part of the everyday lexicon of political life here in Northern Ireland. And on the face of it, that seems very straightforward. But like everything, there's probably nuance and interpretation in that as well. TRC is supportive of further inequality of opportunity in teacher recruitment. It's generally opposed to discrimination on the grounds of religious belief, unless the nature of the job requires it to be done by a person holding or not holding a particular religious belief. I think not that this committee has ever said these things, nor the bill sponsor at all, but sometimes there can be a perception out there that somehow Transferor governors are maybe involved in some dubious employment practices because of the provisions that are provided with the exemption in FEDO. And just to put on record that all governors, including Transferor governors, undergo significant training from the Education Authority on recruitment and selection, and there are rightly already legislative checks and balances in place to ensure that those processes are fair and open. And I suppose it's also a suggestion that what happens here in this part of the world is a bit of an anomaly, that no one else has sort of a sense of school ethos being part of how recruitment takes place. But just to, I think in the Scotland and Catholic schools, that those who want to work in those schools have to indicate that they are willing to support the aims, missions and values and ethos of the school to which they're applying. So I guess one of the questions for the committee to consider is, if the FEDO exemption is removed, in what way can a board of governors or school leadership ensure that those employed by the school will work to uphold and maintain that school's ethos, whether that's a controlled school, a maintained school, an integrated school, an Irish medium school, whatever the school, every school has its ethos. How can that be maintained if this is removed? But that's our short opening remarks, and happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Karen, for that. I suppose, just leading on from where you left off, there is an argument that religious ethos should not be a feature of a modern state education system. So how do you justify sustaining such an ethos in the current social environment?
I'll start and then I'll bring Peter in on this. I suppose what people sometimes forget is that the reason that we have the schools that we have today was because churches started them. And I know that feels like, well, that was 100 years ago and time has moved on, but I think it's important to restate that point. And I think the non-denominational Christian ethos in controlled schools, and you'll be hearing from other sectors next week, I think, so they can speak for themselves. But those, they're open to all, open to people of all faiths and none. They uphold values around compassion, honesty, integrity, kindness, those kind of things. And I don't think those can be argued with. And again, those values are held by people who share faith and don't have faith. So I don't think that the non-denominational Christian ethos in which many of our controlled schools are founded is a hindrance in terms of modern day education. But Peter, maybe you want to come in to speak to that.
It'd be difficult to add anything. I think Karen, you summed it up correctly. I think, it's just that opportunity. And also, if you look around the world, that there are a range of schools, in different types of schools in many different countries, and I don't believe there's a country where there's one state school that with with no religious schools in the country. So I don't think that I think our society is mixed, and therefore our schools can be mixed.
Okay, and in your submission as well, you kind of express concern in relation to, the exemption may be removed from controlled schools and perhaps not the contained or the Catholic maintained schools. That's not our understanding at all from the bill sponsor. But can you just maybe elaborate your concerns around that for me, Karen?
Again, I'll start and Peter can come in. I don't think we were saying that would be removed from one and not from the other, and apologies if that's how that came across. I think actually it was picked up well by your previous witnesses, your previous session with the Equality Commission, and at one stage the issue around the RE certificate was a challenge, and actually if you like, the FETO exemption provided a backstop, if you want to use that term, or just provided a bit of a safety net in relation to that. But actually the RE certificate is becoming more available through Stranmillis directly and through other teacher training. And so I suppose the question is how can schools, any school of any sector, not have the capacity to ensure that those that work in the school are there to support the ethos of that school, because every school has an ethos, whether it's non-denominational Christian or not. Every school has an ethos, and I presume that those who want to promote that ethos want to ensure that those that are working within that school environment are also in support of that ethos as well. And Peter, do you want to come in there?
Well, no, I think you again have said it correct, what was said, but it is that the ethos is the key thing with us. I think our key concern here is that schools will still be able to ask that question in an interview situation. How will you hope to fulfil the ethos within the school and to protect the ethos of the school, whatever that ethos may be. And I think that's where we feel is most important.
Okay, thank you. And also in your submission, you refer to narrowing or redefining of the exemption if necessary. Can you just give us a wee bit more detail on what this would look like?
Peter, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I think that it's again going back to this protection of the ethos, and I think that's where we would like to look at would there be an opportunity to adjust the bill as it's going through now in such a way that that ethos was protected. I think that currently the bill goes through and takes every reference to schools out of the veto exemption, because the veto exemption still remains because churches have that protection when they employ people. So it's taking aspects of the bill out. So that I think that was where we were looking at. Karen, if you want to add to that.
Well, I think in addition to that, and again, your previous evidence session covered this as well, the issue, there is a slight difference, I think, between post-primary schools and primary schools. And that's kind of stage, if this is the mind of the Assembly to put this legislation through, that some sort of phased approach whereby maybe post-primary schools, and I think in some of the evidence that is in and around this, there is more mixing in terms of teacher community background at post-primary than there is at primary anyway, but to do that in a stage approach might help with understanding the equality impact initially, and kind of get an understanding of how it's working before kind of rolling it out across the board.
Okay. No other members have indicated that they wish to ask any questions. So thank you very much for giving us your evidence here this afternoon and taking the time to brief the committee members. Thank you, Karen, and thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. In relation to the briefings that we've taken today, have members any observations or that they would like to address? We will be continuing to hear evidence. We're CCMS next week, isn't it? So we'll have a wider look at some of these issues again next week. Okay, we'll move on. Right, item number 7, forward work programme. Can I refer members to pages 60 to 64 of the meeting pack for the forward work programme? Following the reshuffle within the Cabinet Office, James Cleverly MP has been appointed Minister of State, which is Minister for Europe within the UK Government, replacing Chris Heaton-Harris. It's musical chairs sometimes. The committee has approached the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office for a briefing with the committee and waits a reply. So can I seek your agreement to receive a briefing from the EU Affairs Manager on the 2nd of March also? Okay. Members, the Integrated Education Fund and Ulster University have offered a joint briefing on the Fair Employment School Teachers Bill. If we could have agreement from the committee members that we invite them on the 23rd of February. Okay. So if you're content with to note the remainder of the forward work programme. Item number 8, correspondence. Members, there are 9 items of correspondence from pages 65 to 129 in the meeting pack, and there's 4 additional items in pages 7 to 159 of the table pack. Item 8.1 is the Finance Committee Estimates Memoranda 2021 to 2022 spending. To be noted, 8.2 Business Office Executive Committee Functions Act 2020 amendments to the Ministerial Code. Members, these amendments are required to be moved by the First and Deputy First Minister. Item number 8.3, Northern Ireland Veterans Commissioner, Victims and Survivors Service Funding. Can I seek your agreement to write to the Victims and Survivors Service to ask for the criteria by which they assess funding for groups based on that letter? 8.4, the Executive Office, Department of Justice and Department of Health News release Domestic and Sexual Abuse and Violence Against Women and Girls Strategies. It's call for views and the closing date is extended to the 21st of March, to be noted. Just to remind members, we're hosting, the committee is hosting its online stakeholder session next Thursday at 10 a.m. Michael, do you want to maybe give a few words of just what the structure is in and around that, online event?
Sure. Thank you, Chair. The general idea is to add value to the consultation and not sort of duplicate it in any way. So the idea is that the invitees from the various organisations will appear virtually, and members can come along and participate in that and hear what's being said. The idea is to look at 3 main themes in sort of breakout discussions. One is really around, well, one of the concerns that have been raised by the women's sector is that there's been a lack of engagement on other themes. I think it's a different matter with the current the current strategy consultations. But it's really to look at how that engagement has taken place and how effective it is, and how people feel engaged with throughout the process. The second one is to look at models of good practice as to how things are done well elsewhere on this particular subject. And the third one is really looking at accountability, how the aims and objectives of the strategy and the actions of the strategy are overseen, whether independently or by a body of other organisations. So it's really to look at how that might be done as well. So it goes a bit beyond what the consultation is doing, and the committee can then add value to that.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Item 8.5, the Executive Office news release on the Northern Ireland Civil Service Permanent Secretary appointments, and congratulations to Professor Neil Gibson and to Colin Boyle on their appointments. 8.6, Justice Committee response on SL1, the Department's Transferor Function Appeal Services Order. Members, can I seek your agreement to consider this SL1 at next week's meeting? In the absence, again, of the First Minister and Deputy First Minister to move it in the Assembly, the order will be carried over to the next mandate. 8.7, joint statement by Vice President Maris Sefcovic and the UK Foreign Secretary Liz Truss, 11th of February 2022. 8.8 is Conor Byrne's response to the House of Lords Subcommittee on the Protocol on Ireland, Northern Ireland. Queries again regarding Article 2 of the Protocol to be noted. 8.9 is the Northern Ireland Audit Office response to our letter last week, which was quite quick, regarding the secondments from SIB to the Northern Ireland Civil Service and Public Accounts Committee report. You will see that there was quite a long response there, because they forwarded a report that they did in November on the Northern Ireland Civil Service regarding resource and recruitment, etc. So can I seek your agreement that we forward that report on to the Finance Committee? Okay. 8.10, Department of Finance News, release update from Finance Minister on the draft budget. 8.11, Department of Health News, release regional trauma network for Northern Ireland. 8.12 was correspondence regarding the Department of Health News release on the easing of COVID-19 regulations. 8.13 was a report on the ad hoc committee on the Bill of Rights. I was just wondering, would Emma like an opportunity just to give us an overview on this particular issue? Is Emma there? Perhaps members, we might consider deliberating on this report as a separate item at next week's meeting to decide what action the committee may wish to take. And maybe Emma will give us a bit of an overview from her observations at the coal front there as chair of the committee. Sorry, Emma.
Hello?
Emma, sorry, we lost you there for a few seconds. I'm just indicating we had correspondence, obviously, regarding the ad hoc committee on the Bill of Rights, and I was wondering, did you want to make any comments on it? And I thought it would be opportune maybe for the committee to look at the report next week as an item of business at our committee and see what response that they might wish to make. But if you want to give, some of your observations now.
Yeah, no, thank you, Chair. Apologies, I cut out there. But I suppose during the debate on Monday evening, a lot of the context was covered. Effectively, we had a process whereby the 5 main parties obviously had signed up to consider creating a Bill of Rights as part of NDNA. We all joined the ad hoc committee. I was acting in good faith and believed others were too. And then we seen consensus amongst all 5 parties that we agreed that we did need a Bill of Rights for the North. And then we didn't have the panel of experts who were there to guide us all along. And then very late in the game, when parties were asked to provide position papers, the DUP provided a position paper in which they stated that they didn't think a Bill of Rights had merit, and that any Bill of Rights that we should have should focus on principles as opposed to rights. So it meant then that things were difficult in terms of actually coming up with a Bill of Rights that we could present as something that should then be legislated for. And so that is where we're at. But I do think we obviously spent 2 years gathering evidence and working with stakeholders and experts in the field, and there's been probably what you would say a lot of groundwork done there, and I would hope that we would see progress on this in the next mandate.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else want to make any comment? Okay. I still think that there's merit in deliberating on this report as a separate item at next week's meeting, just to decide any action from the committee. So we'll give it further consideration.
Chair, can I come in?
Yes, of course.
Thank you, Chair. No, well, really just to say that this has been debated in the Chamber. And Emma has stated quite clearly that it has gone as far as it's going to go in this mandate. And I'm wondering what the point would be in us spending a lot of time on it next week, since there's already been a conclusion and a debate in the House.
Well, Diana came in on table papers, and I thought to give the committee some time to give it consideration and to read the report and to make any observations next week, rather than asking people to maybe think about it at this particular point.
I'm just saying that, had members wished to make an observation on this, they could have made the observation during the debate in the House. I'm not precious about it, but I'm just wondering, are there other things that we would more usefully do, since this has already been concluded and debated? That's all.
I would still like to put it down just in the agenda for a quick deliberation for next week. Thank you. So if members are content, please note the rest of the correspondence. Thank you. Item number 9, any other business? Has any other business, anybody got anything? No. So the date and time of the next meeting is Wednesday the 23rd of February at 2 p.m. in room 30. That's the quickest meeting yet, so I'll adjourn the meeting now. Thank you.
Surely we can beat that record next week.
Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 30.